minute or so. What I'll do is I'll just get started and just go through one or two slides before I actually demonstrate the checklist functionality that we were looking at today. So obviously our topic for today is the Part 4 annual compliance statement, which I have to admit, I am glad I'm not a compliance officer at this time of the year. I know you're all up to your ears and it's a hectic time, and it's one I still have slight PTSD. I've been a PIP. So we'll see. Today I'll be doing most of the presenting because it's you know, as you know, calQrisk is always trying to help its clients and users with, you know, exercises that are challenging. One of the things that I was asked about quite recently was the annual compliance statement. So I'm more than happy to help with creating the checklist. I have Emer on hand in the background, who you all know, our head of customer support. And if I start to lead you astray in any of the software demo parts, she'll set me right, because that is definitely not my area of expertise. But hopefully it makes sense if I can kind of explain why we have it set up the way it is set up. I don't normally work on the software side. So as I say, we have our expert on hand for anything complicated. So that's the session today is intended to cover, so I should say from the outset, please note that it is being recorded. The idea being, again, obviously a lot of people are very busy today, so we want to make sure that if others want to use this, the recording is available. Please use the Q&A site or any of the comments options on the webinar if you have questions as we go. I'll hopefully address most of them as we go through it, but more than happy to come back and review anything, and Emma will keep an eye on the questions for me as well, just make sure I don't miss anything. So, as you all know, look, the legislative basis of the annual compliance statement is as it is. Section 66C has to be completed once a year. The new addition, I guess, this year under the Credit Union Act 2023 was interesting in that it added a subsection 1A that the bank may prescribe the form and content of the annual compliance statement. So it will be interesting to see, I guess, if there are changes to the format going forward. It could just simply be that there are certain changes that they are thinking about or may just have it for the future. The annual compliance statement, as you know, has to be done within 2 months of the financial year end. So we try to put this as early in October as possible to try and give people a chance to have something that may help with the process. So as you know, the actual return itself just has basically 2 questions, and the second question is broken into 2 parts. The credit union is either compliant with the requirements of Part 4 of the Credit Union Act, or they may be non-compliant with either material or non-material breaches, or both. So your statement is basically quite short, but then as we know, and as I know from years of doing it, it's not so much about the statement, it's more about the supporting documents. We all have to have the evidentiary piece in place so that if credit union is challenged in any way about the content of its annual compliance statement, that we know where everything is and what we responded in a given year. So what we're going to focus on today is the first part of it, which is the checklist itself. How does the compliance officer go through the mechanism of making sure that the credit union is still compliant with all the different requirements, of which we know there are very many. The other documents, obviously, that form part of the annual compliance statement exercise are your own compliance audit documents, your testing findings, the various evidentiary documents that will need to be referenced throughout this particular process, and also your board-approved materiality statement. So I'll brush on a couple of those things today, but really the focus of today's demonstration is on the checklist functionality. The quick refresher on the materiality statement, just to bring it back to your minds again, you have to have a rationale for the board's materiality decisions on individual non-compliances. So you have to really kind of think about both the qualitative and quantitative factors that you can consider when you're determining materiality. First one is the frequency of non-compliance, duration of non-compliance, the extent to which it departs from the required standard, what the potential impact either already seen or could materialize in terms of the non-compliance, any indication that it may suggest that there is a serious or maybe a more systemic, more system-wide weakness in your systems and processes. And the number of non-material issues can collectively make up a material issue. So that's one of the challenges that the annual compliance statement exercise poses, I guess. And that's why it's very important to do it refreshed every year, because you can have, you know, small things that look, you know, on their own, not particularly material, but when you combine them with all of them together, it may suggest a bigger issue. So you also have, when you're determining your materiality statement, you have indicators of materiality, and you can determine those for yourselves across a scale. I used to use from a scale from extreme to high, medium, low, trivial. The first three, if it came in under any of the first three, I would then consider it a material breach. If it was lower trivial, I would consider it a non-material breach. And just again, remember that multiple non-material breaches could in effect constitute a material breach. So the indicators that we tend to look at are financial. Is there a financial impact? Reputational. Is there now or could there be in the future reputational damage among stakeholders because of this particular non-compliance? In terms of legal and compliance issues, is the requirement a legal requirement, and therefore is the breach statutory breach, which could attract sanction or penalty? Would or has the breach caused internal disruption, potentially damage to morale internally? It could cause conflicts between credit union officers, so that's something to consider. And operational effectiveness. So does the breach compromise credit union's operational effectiveness? So this is just a quick refresher on the things that you need to be thinking about when you're looking at the individual items as you go through your checklist. So what I'm going to do now is come out of the presentation, and I'm going to log into calQrisk, and I'm going to show you what it looks like. Oops. Apologies. My mother used to say, the more the hurry, the less the speed. There we go. Right, so on the test environment, we have basically created a checklist. So you know that the audits and checklist functionality is available to all the credit unions. It's part of their package. So when you set this up, or when we set this up first, you won't have to do this. It's just to show you where it is. The Part 4 compliance checklist has been created. Basically, it has the hundreds of questions that relate to Part 4. That's been set up, and this is where we're trying to I suppose, add a little to your, or at least help your workload at this time of the year. So that piece, that checklist will be available to you if you so choose to go with this. What happens then, for any of you who are already used to generating checks and checklists, is once you have the core template for the checklist, you can generate a check. And you'll be generating a new check each year. So the check is set up. I suppose, just to show you, if you were starting from scratch, you would literally just populate the screen, which sets up the checklist for you. So you make a copy of it basically from a template every year to do what you need to do. As they say in the best cooking shows, here's one I prepared earlier. So in terms of the Part 4 compliance checklist, I've generated one for this year, and this is what it looks like. So you'll see the way it's set up. We've just set up a category for it, an audit type, the fact that it will be available in all your relevant contexts. And then you've got your Part 4 compliance checklist. Literally, it's just the title. So what I've tried to do is to set it up such that you have the reference to the relevant section. You have the requirement, and on the screen, you can enter compliant. The entries on here, there's lots of them because it's used for demonstration purposes, but you just need to make sure that you have your compliant option, your materially non-compliant or non-materially non-compliant, and the fourth one I usually use is not applicable. So in order to help you with the evidentiary piece, you basically click into the check and you can complete it as you see it there. Some of these will be very simple, nice and short. The things you'll be able to use from reference from previous versions of this that you've used over the years. So in terms of the first requirement, the credit union shall have a board of directors. Fairly simple. Your statement is that the board of directors, you may have 9 members, 11 members, whatever your particular arrangement is. So you can state here within this screen, so you can go straight into the screen rather than doing it on the previous one if you like, and just choose whether you want to, whether you determine that it's compliant or non-compliant across the various options. So the way it's structured, and you'll please excuse me, I've made a little bit of poetic license, I guess, around the description of some of the checks so that it looks a little bit more like a check rather than the legalese that's in the Act itself, but the requirement is still exactly the same. The requirements that have changed during the year under the Credit Union Act 2023 Credit Union Amendment Act 2023 have been integrated. There is just one that is not yet, it's only become effective from the 30th of September onwards, and that's regarding the change for policy and plan review from the minimum of 1 year to over 3 years. So for next year's checklist, that change will be built in. But I'm assuming that the requirement to have reviewed all policies and plans at least annually still applies for the 2023 to 2024 financial year. So you'll see, as I say, each item is listed there. An example, let's say, of a non-materially non-compliance might be, for example, where you have attendance at a board meeting was not good this year, as good this year as previous years. A quorum was met on all occasions except one, which was rescheduled. One director has changed jobs mid-year and time to devote credit union is becoming challenging. The director intends to resign at upcoming AGM and nomination committee has identified a suitable candidate to propose at AGM. And I would reference your materiality statement for details regarding the materiality assessment or rationale. So the reason, I guess, is I think it's very important to have your rationale for determining either compliance or non-compliance where you can, point to where the evidence might be. So if it's a document, if it's a file, just include a reference in there. I guess it's important both from your own perspective to be able to see, you know, for varying years, what the material that you made your assessment on, where it is. It's also useful, obviously, if there's a change of role mid-year and maybe someone else is doing the compliance role this time next year, and they will find the references to the location of documents and so on very useful. Obviously, it's intended for the regulator ultimately, in that if there's a query as regards to the annual compliance statement, that you can point to the material that you used in this particular exercise. Sometimes there will be, you might have a recommendation as to how to address something. So, and you can populate that here, and you may have a management response if you choose. So all of the idea about putting all of this together, it will make sense when we come to the next stage on it. I just kind of want to give you kind of an example then of one, let's say here, I have a material breach listed somewhere. Yeah, I've just demonstrated some, or at least populated some of these for demonstration only. You'll get the blank one to complete for yourselves. So, for example, materially non-compliant might be, you know, to see compliance records, including all policies, compliance audits, etc. There was a material data breach during the year, which was reported to Data Protection Commission, and affected members were notified. God forbid that should happen to any of you, but unfortunately these things do. And I guess this has always been the most challenging section, I think, of the whole annual compliance statement, because it basically covers everything else apart from Part 4 of the Act. So it's saying, obviously, that the board is responsible for ensuring compliance with Credit Union Acts and all other financial services legislation. So for me, this is the one that, you know, comes up occasionally when there are other related matters during the year where a compliance breach may have occurred. So in terms then of how it looks, this is kind of how the process would work. Once you have completed all of the questions, answered them as you see fit, and at any time in between, of course, if you so choose to do a kind of an interim status report based on your progress, you can generate a report from the screen, which will look like this. So that brings together in the order, and I've requested that Emer keep it, or whoever's developing these going forward, they keep it in the order of the section number, because I think this will help make an assessment around materiality of non-material breaches as well, which is helpful. So you'll see here that the screens, the fields that I illustrated just earlier, are populated. You don't have to populate all of them, but as I say, it makes sense to use them where they're relevant. So where you've got a description as to what the non-material breach was, then populate it. This is where I, would reference things like, are you compliant with the term of office of directors not extending beyond a third AGM? Make a note of where that file is. In my role, when I was doing it, I used to have an Excel file that had a record of all of the directors who've served over the years. So just put in a reference maybe to where that file name is, and then you'll know where to look for it if there's an issue. Other things, so as I say, it just gives you, they don't have to be massive, just comments as regards why you've assessed it as compliant or non-compliant. You'll see some of them are huge, not that many, thankfully. But what I've tried to do is include it all, so you're not going back and forth to the legislation. So this one relates to the exclusions from membership of the board, so they're all in there. And the answer hopefully will be simply that no director contravenes the list of eligible persons. So that's basically what the system generated report looks like. As I say, it's quite handy to have, if you have a recommendation, that you can populate it in there as well. One of them, I just used it as an example, that the timing between meetings was breached during the year. So let's say, for example, due to lack of quorum, that the reschedule of a second board meeting took place outside of this 6-week limit. So that changes because of the 10-week new limit under the Credit Union Act. But sorry, I should say it was 10 weeks, yeah, because that's already in place. So the chairperson of the board should remind all directors of the importance of advance notification where possible if they would be unable to attend a board meeting to allow for timely rescheduling within the required timeline. Note the time permitted between meetings has increased to 10 weeks under the Credit Union Amendment Act 2023. So again, it's a useful piece to be able to point to when you're engaging with the board as regards how these kind of things could be avoided going forward. Just to maybe move down a little bit more. Yeah, so that gives you an illustration of kind of what it would look like, what the system generated report looks like. Just to show you, you can generate and say it will show you the ones that you haven't answered yet if you want to do this kind of mid process. In terms of a material breach, you might want to have an action or an explanation of what the breach was. And the reason this extra information is quite useful to be populated in here is that when you're finished this process, you'll be able to generate the report, save it into Excel, and then use these comments to populate your materiality register if you have material breaches. So as you know, as part of the upload to central bank, if you have material breaches, you have to complete a materiality Excel file to go with it to explain the circumstances of the breach and so on and so forth. So there's a series of questions, but what you'll find is, for example, the first question in that is what section does it relate to? The second question is what subsection relates to. So you have section 55, let's say, your subsection is 1M, and then you describe the breach, what actions were taken and so on. So there's a series of questions that you can populate using this information once you generate it into Excel. You can generate the whole file into Excel straight away. But also in conversation with Emer, I thought it might be useful to have a custom report where you literally just extract the material and non-material breaches and eliminate all the compliance pieces, which will help you to populate your materiality register if necessary. So the output of that, I'll just show you what that looks like. So the output of the Excel file, based on the customer report, looks something like this. So you, again, and I've tried to put it in kind of the rough order in which the materiality Excel file will require them. So you've got your section, your subsection, is at the beginning of the check description. You've got your assessment of materiality, which obviously would have had to have been approved by the board at that point. You've got your comments, and you can copy and paste pieces from the comments, the management responses, and the recommendations into your register. Obviously, that has to be downloaded from Central Bank, so it's just thought it would be easier to have that ready and to hand, saved in Excel or Word, wherever you choose to put it, and then you can simply copy and paste your detail into that register if you have to. So that's what the two reports look like. I guess the key thing in terms of this is, you know, it's a long process. I know there's a temptation maybe to use the previous year's report and simply edit it. I guess there's a couple of things I think worth pointing out in relation to that. So let me just go back. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. I meant to go back into where I was. Okay, so I think from a good discipline perspective, I think generating a new checklist each year, you basically copy your checklist and create it for the following year. And starting from blank means that you minimize the likelihood of assuming that the credit union is remaining compliant if they were compliant the previous year. It minimizes the chance that interconnected questions are overlooked. So for example, section 53.5 refers to the board directors having sufficient time for their roles, and section 54.1 refers to the maximum interval between meetings. And if, for example, you look at 54.1 in the following year, they were both compliant, let's say the previous year, and you look at 54.1 and go, okay, we had to reschedule a couple of meetings due to quorum issues. So is that suggesting then that they maybe don't have sufficient time, in which case you might want to go back to section 53.5 and adjust that. So I think there's a good discipline because there's so much detail in it to go through it all from start to finish, and it does prompt other questions and I suppose back checking that they're consistent. It also gives a chance to integrate the more recent legislative changes as and when they occur. So when you generate your new checklist, you can just make sure that anything that's has changed in the year between will be adjusted for that particular checklist. As I said, the material breaches report can be populated from the output from the checklist. I did consider it just being the material breaches, but as we know, it's not as simple as generating a single line for each material breach, because it could come down to an assessment of a number of non-material breaches constituting materiality. It's also, and I'm not recommending this, but it is possible not to go through this every year if you so choose. You can generate the file at the end of the process into Word. You can copy that or Excel, and you can copy that file next year and literally just go with a pre-populated version. As I said, for the three reasons I've just mentioned in the slide, my approach would be to start with a blank document where you can, and just copy and paste the relevant items. You can have last year's report open at the same time and copy and paste the relevant answers, but it does mean that you retain the discipline of going through all of the questions and making sure that there aren't interconnected ones that need to be addressed or adjusted. So I know you're really busy this time of year, and that's why I've tried to keep it short and sweet. There's a couple of questions I'll have a look at now in a second. Just in terms of the practicality of it itself, as I say, the functionality is available to all the customers. You just have to request the checklist and or the, well, not or, but and the customer report if you want it. But just drop the help desk an email and express a request for it, and they will put the checklist onto your database for you. You'll also have access to the customer report if you want it, so that'll be put into your customer reports section. So please feel free to get in touch with the help desk after this webinar if you would like it. So in terms of the questions, the check approach is nice and neat, and I can see the is identified in the compliance widget report, or can we still rely on it? It's not an either or. The compliance widget report is it's for your own benefit. That's based on the questions, the risk assessments. Absolutely, that's still reliable. I guess what we were trying to facilitate in this is just having a document that is there that'll help you to populate the, let's say it now in a second, the materiality register and so on. It also gives you a kind of a working document that's a little bit clearer in terms of the particular requirements, what the sections are, what the subsections are, and so on and so forth. So it's not, if you're happy with the system you have, that's absolutely fine. It gives others, a chance to look at it and maybe present it slightly differently, particularly if you're making a presentation to the board and so on. So, but it's really not it's not an either or. It's if you so choose to go down this route, it'll be available to you. So we're certainly all about trying to make your lives easier, not harder. So please feel free to continue with your own mechanisms and
Sorry, I think Sandy might be frozen there, so I'm just going to carry on with her answer, but I think she's answered the very first question there. And how many questions made up in the checklist in total, please? I believe, and Sandy will have a better exact number, but I believe there's about 280 questions there in the checklist in total. Okay, so it's quite a lot, but it does cover everything, so you're quite covered there. Just answer those. Fantastic. Okay, hopefully I'm still here and Sandy's just gone. I don't see any more questions, guys. If you have any more, do shout and do get in touch with the help desk. And do, if you're interested in it, just let us know. I've got a couple of requests already, which is fantastic. So we'll bring that in into your system along with the custom report if you request it as well. Be a little bit of training involved if you want it as well, just to get the checklist up and going. Okay, so I'm going to end this meeting now, but like I said, do feel free to shout out if you have any more questions or queries. Oh, I think we have another. Thanks. So the checks, and so it's not, some of you guys have asked about the audit module. So the audit module itself has a lot more going on than the checks and checklists. So that one is not free, but the checks and checklist is part of the package with a credit union just for this specific purpose as well. So I'm happy to answer any more questions about that in the future, or through email if you want as well. Thanks everyone. I'm going to leave it at that, and have a good day.